Hey parents, welcome to week 18 of your Get Kids Internet Safe app. This week we're going to talk about mental health and screen use. And with the kids, we're going to talk about cyberbullying. So let's get started. Okay, so oftentimes I do workshops, webinars, and keynote presentations about screen safety. But another thing I often comment on is mental health because I'm a clinical psychologist. I've been in practice for over 25 years. And we now see that screen use and mental health often intersect. It became particularly obvious during the COVID-19 pandemic, where everybody was undergoing stay-at-home orders. We saw mental health skyrocket in our psychology offices, and people were really at a loss of what to do. So let's talk a little bit about mental health. So children and teens, since mobile tech has come into our home, have been demonstrating mental health symptoms younger and younger with increasing severity of symptoms. Now, all of us go through regular mood swings where sometimes we're sad and sometimes we're happy, sometimes we're anxious and sometimes we're not. So I thought it would be important to kind of talk to you a little bit about when is sadness concerning? When do you need to get help? So in clinical psychology, we use what's called the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic Statistics Manual until the 6 comes out anyway. And that gives us our framework for when emotions become a clinical disorder versus regular, daily variation. Now, for clinical depression, you have to meet a certain number of criteria. Now, these are subjective, so it has to do with the reporting of your client, and it also has to do with your interpretation of that data. We can't just take a blood test and figure out if somebody's clinically depressed or not. So here's what our criteria are. In order to meet criteria for a major depressive episode, you have to have depressed or irritable mood most of the time, nearly every day for a period of 2 weeks or longer, or what we call anhedonia, which is a loss of interest in pleasure in things that used to be interesting or pleasurable for you. If you don't get either of those, then you're not depressed. But if you get one of them, then we keep asking questions. And you need 5 of these criteria in addition to either depressed mood or anhedonia in order to get the diagnosis. You have to see a change in sleep patterns. So for adolescents and kids, that often means they're sleeping more. And for adults, that often means they're sleeping less. A change in appetite or weight, again, it can be eating more or it could be eating less. And if it's less, you want to check for weight loss or failure to gain weight satisfactorily for children and teens. You also have to meet criteria for psychomotor agitation, which means having a hard time sitting still or feeling really jittery, or psychomotor retardation, which means feeling heavy and slow, a loss of energy and fatigue, feelings of self-blame, worthlessness, or inappropriate guilt, difficulty concentrating or making decisions, and finally, thoughts of death or suicide. And oftentimes, I also assess for self-harm in that category. So if anybody in your family shows these symptoms, it's important for you to get them help sooner rather than later, because research has shown that cognitive behavioral therapy and or antidepressants can make a difference. And the sooner you get help, the better. Now, in regard to anxiety, what is clinical and what isn't? Now, it is natural to be anxious because if we weren't, we would just like walk off the curb and get hit by a car. Anxiety is our way of kind of telling us that we need to be hyper alert or aroused to make sure that we're safe. It becomes a clinical disorder when people meet impairing criteria, similar to what I just went over. And I won't go over those because it would take too long. And I try to keep these videos short. But some of the anxiety disorders that the DSM offers is panic disorder. And that means having a collection of panic symptoms and also a dread or an avoidance of places in order to avoid further panic attacks. Generalized anxiety disorder, which means worry, 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 worry all the time, even though you don't need to worry. And social anxiety, which is difficulty performing or being in crowds where people feel judged or criticized or evaluated. Now, like I said, anxiety can be adaptive, but it is impairing if it stops people from enjoying their regular life or going to work or school or causing problems in relationships. It has to be impairing enough across context to be concerned. And of course, we all vary on our natural anxiety. Some of us are nervous Nellies, just born that way, or tenderhearted, I like to call that, where we're extremely perceptive and we have a hard time keeping our anxiety at bay. So nature is what you're born with, and nurture is what you experience in life. More trauma, more challenge, more inconsistency can cause anxiety. And sometimes your personality leads you to anxious situations, and sometimes anxious situations impact your personality. That's why we call it nature via nurture instead of nature versus nurture these days. Now, I wanted to go over some of the mistakes parents make when it comes to mental health and safety. One is that sometimes parents are too distracted to notice. So it's important to carve out that time and take an assessment of your child once in a while where you just get your eyes on them and interact with them and make sure they're okay, and simply ask. Sometimes parents, when they see something concerning, they panic and they try to like force the kid to stop. Like in the case of self-harm, for instance, a lot of times parents will give consequences and lecture and scold instead of giving them the loving support that they need. So don't panic and worry about how it's going to reflect on you. Worry about your child's mental health overall. Also, a lot of times parents assume it's temporary, where they're like, all kids and all teens have trouble sometimes, it'll go away. If it's persisting, don't assume that it's going to go away on its own. You may need to help or get a professional in to help. Don't lecture and try to fix them. We can't, as parents, we're not empowered enough to change people's mental health. Even our kids and teens, they have to step in and do some of that themselves. So it's a superstition that kids sometimes have, and also that parents have, that the parent can fix it for them. Sometimes they have to learn the skills themselves. Don't threaten therapy. If you keep doing this, you have to go to therapy. Therapy should be, if necessary, presented as a help instead of a punishment. These days, kids don't have the stigma that we did when we were little. So therapy can be a soft, cozy place to get support, both for the family and for the kids. Sometimes parents don't follow up. They don't ask the kid, hey, how did that situation go the other day? Or how's the friendship going now? Or how are you feeling? Make sure you follow up if you hear something from your child one day, a couple days later, even a couple hours later. Sometimes parents assume self-harm is a suicide attempt, where self-harm is typically more of a behavior designed to get relief from the dull absence of feeling. Or sometimes it's a contagious behavior where kids are just experimenting with self-harm. Most kids these days do experiment now because they see it online. When I was a young psychologist, we called it a contagious behavior because when I worked at the hospital, if one teenager engaged in self-harm, then they all did. And now we see the internet demonstrating that contagious behavior. So don't panic if your kid experiments with it. It's not uncommon these days, and it doesn't mean they're going to kill themselves. Just simply talk to them calmly. And if you're struggling, get some support. Another mistake is sometimes parents demand that the child tell them why. Why do you feel sad? Why do you feel anxious? Look, kids and teens don't know why. So when you ask them, it just gives them more pressure. And sometimes they start guessing and then they say things that are even more upsetting than if they didn't say anything at all. Stay away from the why, or ask it once, but don't hammer them with it. It can often escalate problems. Sometimes parents don't recognize that the child's trying to protect them. In other words, sometimes kids don't tell parents how they feel because they don't want to upset the parent. Don't overlook that. And sometimes kids and teens don't say how they're feeling because they're afraid their parents will take away their screen time. Make sure and reassure them that you're not going to punish them if they talk to you about how they're feeling. When should you seek help? Like I said, if the kids are impaired in their ability to go to school or have relationships, if they're demonstrating avoidance of certain situations or isolation where they won't come out of their room, maybe they have intrusive thoughts, which are thoughts they can't help having that tell them to do something disturbing or that really bother them. If they're demonstrating a significant issue where their problem solving declines, if they're developing bad habits that you've never seen before, if they're engaging in self-harm or suicidal ideation, those are all situations where you can seek professional help, either from the school counselor, your pastor or bishop, or spiritual counselor at church, and or from therapists or licensed psychologists in your community. Next week, we're going to talk about co-workstations and multitasking. So one more tip. If you're concerned about mental health in your kids and they're the age where you're going to allow social media or you're already allowing social media, check out my social media readiness course at the Get Kids Internet Safe website. This is the one course that I don't cover in the app. I touch upon it and I include some materials from the course, but it's the social media readiness course is designed for tweens and teens so that they're resilient and that they learn the information and the psychological wellness tools they need to be healthy. And there's mastery quizzes with each lesson, so they have to pass a mastery quiz each week until they graduate with their certificate, so that you know that they're not just skipping over the content. They have to learn it in order to pass the quiz. So check that out at the getkidsinternet.safe.com site, and it's called the Social Media Readiness Course. Okay, stay tuned for your family video.